It is time for us to speak out, to resist, and to protect those freedoms that we hold dear, that I myself raised my hand and said I will protect and defend. The time for complacency is done. The time for action is right now. I swore my oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Hello, hello. How is everybody this fine Saturday evening? All right. Hello. All right, so welcome to Saturday Night Bitchin' Witch Angry Veteran Rants. I am pissed off tonight. So, we are going to start ranting tonight with the hands-off protests that took place around the country today. From there, we're moving on to more icing college kids. This time, there's no apparent reason because none of them had any kind of ties to pro-Palestinian anything. I am. Sorry, y'all. And lastly, they're criminalizing miscarriages. So, so-called hands-off demonstrations were organized in more than 1,200 locations in all 50 states today by more than 150 groups like civil rights organizations, labor unions, LGBTQIA advocates, veterans, and elections activists. From the capitals of all 50 states to Midtown Manhattan to Boston Common and the National Mall. Thousands of protesters went off on the fascist Cheeto and Mussolini's downsizing the government, nuking the economy, squashing human rights, and treating immigrants like criminals. Here in Seattle, in the shadow of the Space Needle, protesters held signs saying things like, "Fight the oligarchy," and more. Anger over the firing of thousands of federal workers, along with the closing of Social Security Administration field offices, the effective shuttering of entire government agencies, deporting legal immigrants, and scaling back protections for our transgender family and friends, as well as the cuts in funding for necessary health programs boiled over into protest today. And I can't blame them. Kelly Robinson, president of the Human Rights Campaign, addressed a National Mall rally alongside Democratic members of Congress, condemning the administration's LGBTQIA policies. She emphasized the personal nature of the attacks, saying, "The attacks that we're seeing, they're not just political. They are personal, y'all. They're trying to ban our books. They're slashing HIV prevention funding. They're criminalizing our doctors, our teachers, our families, and our lives." She added, We don't want this America, y'all. We want the America we deserve, where dignity, safety, and freedom belong not to some of us, but to all of us. Boston saw signs saying hands off our democracy and hands off our Social Security. Can't complain there. Michelle Wu, the mayor, said she doesn't want her children and others to have to live in a world where threats and intimidation are government tactics and values such as equality and diversity are under attack. I refuse to accept that they could grow up in a world where immigrants like their grandma and grandpa are automatically presumed to be criminals, she said. Roger Broom, a 66-year young retiree from Delaware County, Ohio, was one of the hundreds rallying at the Columbus State House. Once upon a time, he was a Reagan Republican, but Trump has turned him off. He's tearing this country apart, says Mr. Broom. It's just an administration of grievances. A few miles from Trump's golf course in Jupiter, Florida, where Tiny Hands McGee spent the morning at the club's senior club championship, hundreds of people demonstrated at Palm Beach Gardens. People also lined both sides of PGA Drive, encouraging cars to honk and chanting anti-Trump slogans. Archer Moran of Port St. Lucie said they need to keep their hands off of our Social Security, adding, the list of what they need to keep their hands off of is too long, and it's amazing how soon these protests are happening since he's taken office. I mean, it's only March, and I know there were protests. Oh, wait, it is April now. Hasn't even been 100 days in office, and I know that protests started at least for Mussolini mid-February at the latest, maybe a weekend. So the fascist Cheeto plans to play golf again Sunday, the White House says, coming from the man who complained loudly and frequently about President Obama golfing. By the way, Cheeto Face, he's gone golfing more during his first term he went golfing more during his first term than Obama did in both terms in office. I cannot stomach the hypocrisy here. There have been multiple nationwide demonstrations against Cheeto Man and Mussolini since the inauguration. However, the movement had yet to produce a mass mobilization like the 2017 Women's March. Remember the Pussy Hats? Damn it, I meant to grab mine. Or the Black Lives Matter demonstrations after George Floyd's murder in 2020. Until today. In Charlotte, North Carolina, protesters were supporting causes from women's reproductive rights and immigration to education and Social Security. Britt Castillo, a 35-year-old hailing from Charlotte, says, regardless of your party, regardless of who you voted for, what's going on today, what's happening today is abhorrent. It's disgusting. And as broken as our current system might be, the way that the current administration is going about trying to fix things, it is not the way to do it. They are not listening to the people. And now, let's move on to Tiny Hands McGee trying to force international students out of our universities. Wow. I'm taking a sip. So, let's look at UCLA, UC San Diego, UC Irvine, UC Berkeley, Stanford, Ohio State, University of Kentucky, University of Oregon, go Ducks, University of Minnesota, Tufts, Arizona State, University of Texas, University of Colorado, and North Carolina State. These colleges all have something in common. Cheeto Man has canceled dozens of student visas for international students, and this has been confirmed by university leaders, students, and faculty at these campuses. These actions have college officials concerned that this will make foreign students think twice about studying here in the U.S. Are you surprised? I'm not surprised. UCLA saw at least 8 international students hit. Nobody knows whether they were detained by immigration officials or why their visas were revoked. That is scary AF. Pradeep Khosla, chancellor at UCSD, in a campus message late Friday night, said that the visas of 5 students were revoked. There was no warning, and a 6th student was, quote, detained at the border, denied entry, and deported to their home country. Sounds like they went to TJ for the weekend and couldn't get back into the States. In this message, Khosla wrote, the federal government has not explained the reasons behind these terminations. The students have been notified, and we are working directly with them to provide support. Stanford officials report that 4 students and 2 recent graduates' visas were revoked. A statement from the university did not identify the reasons behind the revoking or whether the students faced arrest. This is forking ridiculous, you people. Berkeley spokesman confirms that 4 visas at their campus were revoked, 2 for currently enrolled graduate and undergrad, and 2 recent grads working under a professional training visa program that students frequently partake in after getting their degrees. So, in other words, they were all here legally. Statement from University of California said that, quote, several campuses had students whose visa status was revoked, but did not offer details beyond that. A University of California official who did ask to remain anonymous publicly confirmed that the visa actions also affected UC Irvine. University of California is, quote, aware that international students across several of our campuses have been impacted by recent SEVIS terminations, SEVIS. The statement said, SEVIS, referring to the government's Student and Exchange Visitor Information System database. Yep, it's so much easier to say SEVIS. This is a fluid situation, and we continue to monitor and assess its implications for the University of California community and the people affected. We are committed to doing what we can to support all members of our community as they exercise their rights under the law. In doing that, the university will continue to follow all applicable state and federal laws. That was, again, just in case I didn't say this, that was a statement from the University of California about all University of California campuses. University of Southern California, USC Trojans, where the largest foreign student population of more than 17,000 international students is, declined to say whether students on campus were part of the sweep. A statement from the school said, quote, the university does not disclose information about the status of individual student visas. Sounds about like the Trojans. So, Friday saw a wave of mass visa cancellations unfolding at campuses across the country, catching school administrators by surprise. The reasons for these changes were not clear, while the current administration took action last month to cancel visas and arrest students who were pro-Palestinian activists. The State Department chose not to reply to questions from the LA Times about the California student visas. Shocking, right? Department of Homeland Security spokeswoman Teresa McLaughlin in an email said, we'd have to look on a case-by-case basis in response to being asked whether these cancellations had to do with protests or other matters with these students. UCLA student government leaders acknowledged campus concerns late Friday, issuing a statement. The statement from Undergraduate Student Association Council President, now there's a title, Adam Tafeli, and International Student Representative Syed Tamim Ahmad reads, we understand these are deeply uncertain times. To every international student reading this, you belong here. Your presence at UCLA makes this campus stronger, richer, and more beautiful. Cottonmouth from hell, I'm sorry. Our offices will continue to stand, speak, and advocate for you, loudly and unapologetically. Hoy! According to the University of California official, the UCSD students whose visas were revoked were not involved in pro-Palestinian protests. This is being pointed out because Once again, the current administration began revoking student visas last month at high-profile campuses, including Tufts, Cornell, Columbia, George Washington, and others where it alleged that the students aligned with terrorists because of the pro-Palestinian writings or protests and therefore were anti-Semitic. The U.S. designates Hamas as a terrorist organization and argued that the students were supporters of the organization, making them threats to national security and U.S. foreign policy. The students rebut that with the idea that their free speech rights to support Palestinians are being trampled. The cases are currently being fought in federal courts, and because some of them led to immigration arrests, several students are being held at immigration detention facilities. Visas for students who were not involved in pro-Palestinian protests but had other violations on their records are now being targeted by the administration as well. For example, ICE officials this week said that a University of Minnesota student's visa was revoked in March because of a drunk driving incident in 2023 that he pled guilty to, and it had already been reported to the government, and he had been told it was no big deal, no further issue with it. No further action required. As of March 27th, when Secretary of State Marco Rubio spoke during a visit to Guyana, he said that the U.S. had revoked 300 visas and would continue to evaluate. This next part really makes me rage. We do it every day. Every time I find one of these lunatics, I take away their visa. I hope at some point we run out because we have gotten rid of all of them, but we're looking every day for these lunatics that are tearing things up, he said, referring to student protesters as lunatics. Young adults taking advantage of their First Amendment right to free speech and the right to congregate. He is calling them lunatics because they don't agree with the current administration's opinions. This is our fucking Secretary of State calling children, basically, and young adults forking lunatics. College kids. Lunatics. Maybe it's just because I have kids that are college aged that this really infuriates me as much as it does. But I think anybody who cares about our country is going to be enraged by that one. He continued with saying the government canceled primarily student visas and some visitors' visas, including cases, quote, unrelated to any protests that have to do with, quote, potential criminal activity. The cancellations went unknown until university officials checked SEVIS, a student database that lists international student statuses under the Department of Homeland Security once again. Typically, international students have 2 certifications that allow them to study in the U.S. Students have permission to enter the country while enrolled in classes and abiding by other restrictions, such as limitations on their employment with, quote, student status visas. These are granted and revoked by the Department of State, and the status of them is maintained in SEVIS. Students whose entry visas were canceled typically got to stay here in the U.S. legally to study under previous administrations. They had to renew their visas if they left and wanted to return to the U.S. The current administration, though, is issuing orders through the Department of Homeland Security to leave immediately. Some of the students are in the process of leaving the country on their own, but there are students at University of Alabama and Tufts who have been detained by ICE. In the Tufts case, the student was in custody before the university even knew their legal status had changed, according to the president and CEO of the President's Alliance on Higher Education and Immigration, Miriam Feldblum, students are being ordered to leave the country with a suddenness that universities have almost never seen. None of this is regular practice, she said. 2 Saudi Arabian students left the country after discovering their legal status was terminated, says North Carolina State. The school says the school and students will work out completing their semester from outside the U.S. According to the roommate of one of the students, Philip Vasto, his roommate was a graduate student in engineering management. He was apolitical, not attending protests against the war in Gaza. He was not given a reason for his student status being terminated, Mr. Vasto says. His former roommate's top concern upon returning to Saudi Arabia has been finding a new school. He's made peace with it. He doesn't want to allow it to steal his peace any further, he says. Staff at University of Texas at Austin checked a federal database and discovered permission to be in the U.S. terminated for 2 people there on student visas. One of the 2, from India, had their legal status terminated on the 3rd of April. Sevis indicated a criminal records check, quote, and or has had their visa revoked. The other, from Lebanon's status, was terminated the 28th of March due to a criminal records check. They are digging into They are digging years and years back to find any dirt they can to get these kids out of our country. It is ridiculous. They were both graduates remaining in the U.S. on their student visas, utilizing an option that allows people to acquire professional experience after graduation. Both were not in violation of requirements for pursuing work experience and were both employed full-time, according to someone familiar with the situation. I have to pause here for just a second and say I understand why most of the people who are commenting to the media about all of this are choosing to remain anonymous. The likelihood of retaliatory actions being taken against them is beyond the stratosphere. I mean, there's a 99.9 however many % chance that they will have blowback if anybody finds out they spoke. The State Department is wielding an obscure law that bars non-citizens whose presence could have, quote, serious adverse foreign policy consequences to revoke student visas. Gee, kind of like the president did with his deportations, right? The Cheeto-in-Chief invoked this law demanding action against campus anti-Semitism in a January executive order. Some of the students that were targeted in recent weeks, however, have had zero link to political activism. Ms. Feldblum says that there have been orders to leave over traffic infractions or misdemeanor crimes, and in some cases, the students were targeted for previously reported infractions, such as the driving infraction a few minutes ago. Some of the alleged infractions will probably be a strong test of the students' First Amendment rights as they work their way through court, because in the past they would not have drawn any scrutiny, says Director of Public Affairs at the Migration Policy Institute, Michelle Mittelstadt. In some ways, she says, what the administration is doing is really retroactive. It is unclear whether more visas are being revoked than normal, but officials are fearing a chilling effect on international exchange. The Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities is requesting a meeting with the State Department over this. Bernie Barola, a vice president at the group, says many of the association's members have recently seen at least one student have their visa revoked. Colleges have been interviewing students or searching social media for a connection to political activism because they're not getting a lot of information from the government on this. He says the universities can't seem to find anything that seems to be related to Gaza or social media posts or protests. Some of these kids are sponsored students by foreign governments where they specifically are very hesitant to get involved in protests. Understandably. He also says there is no clear thread indicating which students are being targeted, but some have been from the Middle East and China. Texas A&M officials looked into why 3 students had their status terminated, finding long-resolved offenses on their records, one being a fucking speeding ticket. The kid got their visa revoked over a speeding ticket. America's places of higher learning have been seen as a top destination for the world's brightest minds for a very long time. They have brought important research breakthroughs and tuition revenues to U.S. colleges. Fanta Aw, what a name. Fanta Aw, the CEO of an Association of International Educators, NAFSA, reminds us that international students also have other options. We should not take for granted that that's just the way things are and will always be, she says. Moving on to something else that pisses me the fluff off. A woman, and this is also our last topic, so I'm glad I saved this one for last. A woman in Georgia was arrested after having a miscarriage. A miscarriage. 20 March, in the early morning hours, an ambulance responded to a 911 call about a woman found bleeding and unconscious in an apartment. Upon arrival, the first responders determined a miscarriage. This, however, was barely the start of the ordeal to come. Selena Maria Chandler-Scott was transported to the hospital. A witness, though, reported that she had put the remains of the fetus in a dumpster. The remains were recovered upon investigation, and Ms. Chandler-Scott was now charged with concealing the death of another person and abandoning a dead body. Autopsy determined it to be a, quote, natural miscarriage at about 19 weeks, with the fetus being unviable, and miraculously the charges were dropped. But still, this arrest comes at a time when so many people are looking at prosecutions related to their pregnancies, with the fetus being treated as a person with full legal forking rights. Ms. Chandler-Scott's experience brings up some very troubling questions about miscarriages in states with such strict abortion laws, say advocates for women's health. Questions such as, how should the remains be disposed, and who gets to decide? The state of Georgia. Whoops, sorry, I didn't mean to punch the microphone. The state of Georgia has a 6-week abortion ban. The Living Infants Fairness and Equality Life, how cute, Act that provides any fetus with a heartbeat legal recognition under the law. Many women are not even aware that they are pregnant before 6 weeks, me included. I didn't find out I was pregnant until 8 weeks along with my oldest, 7 weeks with my middle, my fallopian tube rupturing with the ectopic pregnancy, which happens about 8 to 10 weeks, and at about 8 weeks with my youngest. Had these bans existed in the state I lived in when I had my ectopic, I would have been forced into the situation I ended up in with a ruptured fallopian tube before any intervention could happen. I nearly died. I'm not exaggerating. I nearly died because I was bleeding out. And because of these forking bans on abortion, if a woman comes in with an ectopic pregnancy, she has to wait until the fallopian tube ruptures and she has damn near bled out before a doctor will touch her for fear of losing their license or being charged with murder. So the fertility of the pregnant person is not a consideration at all at that point, and they have to be actively dying before most doctors in most of those states will do anything because they fear losing their license or being charged with murder of a fetus. Yes, the push for fetal personhood provisions like the Life Act have been around since before the 2022 Dobbs decision that threw Roe v. Wade out Experts are saying, though, that it has gotten stronger since. In the first 3 months of this year, the Guttmacher Institute, which is a research organization that supports reproductive rights, reported roughly 24 personhood bills. Kiel Weber-Lenz, an expert on stillbirth and pregnancy loss, and also a professor at the University of Iowa College of Law, sees wider implications in Ms. Chandler-Scott's arrest. 10 to 20% of known pregnancies, most often in the first trimester, end in miscarriage, with research proving this. Ms. Lenz observes, if what comes out of you in a miscarriage is a dead human body, and you can't abandon that, you can't put it in the trash, you can't flush it down the toilet, most people experiencing miscarriage are apparently committing crimes in Georgia. Because, what happens if you miscarry and you pass while you're sitting on the toilet because, well, you knew something was going to happen and you wanted to make cleanup easier? If you flush it down the toilet, you have now abandoned a dead body and you have desecrated a dead body, I am willing to bet they will also say. Comparisons are being drawn between Ms. Chandler-Scott's arrest and that of Brittany Watts, who in 2023, at the age of 34, was charged with abuse of a corpse after her miscarriage in Warren, Ohio. The charges against her were also later dropped. She, however, filed a lawsuit in January against the city and the hospital where she sought care. The hospital did file a response in court denying any wrongdoing, and the case is still pending. Last year, Watts said she fears another arrest for similar reasons could happen. As she says, as the old saying goes, history repeats itself. I don't want it to happen in this case. At least 210 women were charged in the year that followed the overturn of Roe v. Wade. According to advocates, this is a distinct rise in those numbers. Shockingly, those struggling with substance use, lower income, and people of color are those particularly vulnerable to these types of interactions with authorities, according to advocates. I'm shocked. Are you shocked? Please. Oh my God. People. I am trying to reconcile the fact that I would have been accused of murder with the ectopic, with the miscarriages I've had. Yeah, they want us as broodmares, barefoot, pregnant, and in the kitchen. That's all women are good for as far as this administration is concerned. I mean, fucking Hegseth has straight up said he doesn't want women in combat positions in the military. We fought like hell to get there. And now he wants to take us back out because we need mothers at home, not on the front lines. I'm going to leave it at that because now I'm going to go scream into a pillow because I hate people today. Please like, share, subscribe. Come back next week for more ranting and raving. And remember, you guys, you are loved, you are wanted, you are needed, and you really do have a purpose here. So go out and spread love, spread joy, and spread kindness. There's enough darkness out there. Can we please be a glimmer of light? I'll see you guys later.